The first time Nia asked a stranger to trade leftovers for a miracle, the man in the carbon-black wheelchair laughed so hard the sound ricocheted off the restaurant's chrome. Leftovers for a miracle. His voice was smooth and tired at once, the kind people called handsome on magazine covers when they were trying to be kind about a man who never smiled. Kid, miracles aren't on the dessert menu. Not dessert, Nia said, hitching her backpack higher. A starter. A staffer in a white apron hovered, unsure whether to shoo the skinny teenager loitering by Elysium's loading dock. The air smelled like butter and seared meat, like expensive wine and the tidal breath of the inner harbor. The restaurant's back door opened and shut, and every time Nia's head tilted toward it as if listening to a rhythm only she could hear. The man in the wheelchair was famous. Not actor famous, the other kind. The kind of money that turned a name into a logo and a logo into the shape of a city. Ezra Gaines. The Harbor Line Tower, with its mirrored ribs that caught sunsets and stretched them like taffy, belonged to him. So did the AI lab in the converted cannery and the biotech wing at Mercy General. He had once summited actual mountains. Now he summited budgets. A climbing accident 5 years back, the internet said. C7, C8 incomplete spinal cord injury, the good articles said, as if any severed thread in a person were so tidy. You're waiting for this? Nia nodded at the polished black to-go bag dangling from the chair's armrest. Waiting? No, I'm taking it. He lifted the bag a fraction to show he could have told his driver to carry it, but hadn't. And you're negotiating. I'm proposing, Nia said. Your leftovers? My miracle? If I fail, you keep your bag and your skepticism. If I succeed, you give me the bag and tomorrow's leftovers too. His laugh came smaller now, the kind that belonged to a man who'd learned to keep his guard up. What's your miracle then? You gonna fix the world with a baguette? Start with the block, she said. How about a smile? He tilted his head, watching her the way men like him learned to watch rooms, looking for angles, exits, tells. She had the look of a kid who had constructed herself from other people's discards, corduroy jacket with patches that did not match, unbranded sneakers, paint spattered, hair braided tight and beaded with tiny bolts she'd polished until they shone. Her eyes were bright and clever the way knife edges are bright. Okay, he said. You've got 30 seconds. Nia reached into her backpack. The apron guy flinched. The driver, Luca, Nia had overheard, shifted. But what Nia pulled out was a flattened paper ring and a clear biodegradable bulb the size of a plum. She stepped to the edge of the dock as if she'd rehearsed how to make this look like a performance instead of a prayer. She snapped the ring, open, a tangle of copper wire soldered to the guts of a music box, and lowered the bulb to the water where the current could decide its drift. Say his name, she told the water, and spun the ring. It whirred. A plucked melody no one recognized threaded the night. A miniature armature inside the ring spun, and tiny magnets danced, and somewhere under the dock a strip of rescued LEDs, stolen from a trashed holiday display and soldered to a battery she had begged from the bodega guy, flickered to life. 10. Little paper boats bobbed out from the pier. They were cut from old menus and receipts, their seams sealed with candle wax. As the current moved them, the LEDs caught the foil ink she'd rubbed onto their sides. They flashed in sequence, stuttering and then smooth, until they spelled 3 letters in soft gold. EZR. The apron guy swore under his breath. The driver laughed without meaning to. Ezra blinked, once deprived of a script. Not magic, Nia said, breathless, crouching beside him as the last boat winked out. It's just math and mercy. You put the LEDs along the posts where the tide rises. You guess the current. You hope the river's in a mood to help, and you steal extra foil from the bakery dumpster. She shrugged. Mostly hope. You knew my name, Ezra said. Everyone knows your name, but not like that. You smiled, she said. That counts. She nodded at the to-go bag. Payment? He didn't give it to her immediately. He sat with his palm on the bag as if it were a small animal that needed reassuring. The light from Elysium's cursive sign painted his face a warm champagne. In the polish of the glass, he could see himself, a man who had once believed movement was the opposite of stillness, not grief. Who are you? He asked. Nia Cole. She stuck out a hand. Her palms were clean but nicked, not dirty but busy. He shook and felt, for a brief and flashing second, the weight of something unseen shifting its balance. Okay, Nia Cole. Trade accepted. He handed her the bag. She took it with the reverence of a person who has learned to be grateful out loud, then tucked a slip of paper into the cuff of his sleeve. Tomorrow, she said. Here, same time. Bring more leftovers. I'll bring a bigger miracle. Tomorrow I have a meeting with people who think miracles cost 8 figures and take 18 months. Then squeeze me in, she said, and the grin she flashed was not begging, not apology. It was audacity with dimples. He watched her, go, slinging the bag, boots whispering on the boards, moving like a kid who owed the world nothing and everything at once. The driver started to say something like you shouldn't encourage them. But Ezra wasn't listening. He was looking at the dark water where the letters had been, at the seam where the harbor met the city and the city met the sky. He almost told himself he wasn't going to come back tomorrow. He almost believed himself. Part 2. The terms Elysium's leftovers became soup for 70 people, but not before Nia scraped the sauce into a jar, cut the steak into bite-sized slices, and inhaled its smell like a promise she had to ration. She set aside a slice of chocolate tart she would not eat. The tart would be for Ms. Ruth, who would say she wasn't hungry, and then eat 3 bites and say that was enough, so that she wouldn't take more than her share, not even in a world that had been taking from her all her life. Where did you get Elysium chocolate? Ms. Ruth asked, eyes shining in the church basement light that made everyone and everything look a little too honest. Trade secret? Nia said. Ms. Ruth's voice was Southern oak, rich, naughty, older than this city and younger too. You went putting our business in someone else's hands? Our business is getting people fed, Nia said. And our other business is making sure nobody thinks they own that business. It's my business to ask for what we need. Ms. Ruth took a polite half-bite of the tart and closed her eyes the way people close their eyes when they remember being cared for. You sound like your grandmother. Nia smiled without saying anything. Her grandmother had been the first to teach her that miracles were often misnamed problems solved, by a safety pin in the right place, by 3 phone calls, by knowing that the electrician's sister's kid had asthma, and that's why he'd come fast. Her grandmother had called it root work, meaning not magic, but the work at the root of things. She wasn't around to see Nia spin copper into light now, but when Nia stepped onto the dock the next night and found Ezra there, early, alone, with 2 bags and a look like he'd talked himself out of this and done it anyway, she could hear her grandmother's voice as clear as if the breath behind it were still warm. Okay, girl. Go on then. Make your grown men rethink themselves. You came, Nia said. I came, Ezra said, gesturing to the bags. I also brought the inevitable. Lecture about safety and boundaries that I will try not to give you. You can give it to me after you watch the miracle, Nia said. He smiled once, quickly. He had exercised between then and now. She could smell the mint eucalyptus of the balm he rubbed on his shoulders when they pinched in rainy weather. People thought paralysis meant no feelings. It often meant too many, in the wrong places. He maneuvered with skill to the edge of the dock where last night's paper boats had curled to paste. Nia stepped beside him, hands in pockets, pretending she hadn't been waiting at the top of the hour like a pilgrimage. What's tonight? He asked. You like music? She said. I did. Nia lifted 2 fingers like a conductor and whistled. From around the corner where the boardwalk widened, a drum beat puffed like heartbeats. More beats joined, sticks on buckets, palms on djembe, the off-time thunk of someone joyfully wrong. Around the bend came a small procession of people in wheels, manual chairs, power chairs, one bright red mobility scooter adorned with silk flowers. On their laps and backs and clamped to their footrests were drums and plastic homeware turned instruments. They were led by a kid not much older than Nia, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Roll with it." "Neighborhood drum," Nia said. They rehearse under the I-83 overpass Tuesdays and Thursdays, but Thursday got rained out, so I asked if they'd come tonight. Ezra watched them take a semicircle, watched the leader, Ty, knee braces bright as candy, signal a 4 count. Music arrived, messy and muscular, imperfect in a way that admitted everyone and still underpinned the rightness of where you were. Bodies moved in chairs differently than bodies moved on feet. That didn't make the movement less. Ty's spin had a physics to it, a torque of shoulders that made light dizzier than any pirouette. Miracles are sometimes what happens when the algorithm says wrong. Try again, Nia said, so softly he almost didn't catch it. So we do it a different way, and it turns out better. Ezra's fingers tapped the armrest. His shoulders loosened. He leaned forward, not as a man straining toward what he'd lost, but as a man remembering curiosity. He laughed when the drummer on the red scooter missed a cue and blushed and got it back on the next beat. When a tourist tried to film too close and Ty rolled forward and said gently, 10 feet, friend, Ezra wore the look of someone who found the boundary beautiful. At the end, Nia clapped and whooped and gave Ty a fist bump like she had been invited to joy instead of fought for a seat at it. "Thank you," she told the group. "This is my friend Ezra. He's got a building with floor-to-ceiling windows that begs for music. You want a gig?" "Paid?" Ty said, eyebrows up. "Paid," Ezra said, surprising himself. "And accessible entrances, accessible bathrooms, accessible everything." "Now that is a miracle," said the man on the red scooter, and everyone laughed in the way people laugh when laughter is permission, when the group rolled off with promise. Of emails and times, Ezra looked at Nia as if her copper ring had spun him out of his silo. "You planned that." "I invoked it," she said. "I owe you leftovers again. You owe me tomorrow's, too." "What's tomorrow's miracle?" "Depends what you bring." He weighed her, the way he weighed term sheets and research proposals. "Come to my office," he said finally. "Meet some people. Tell me what you want to fix first, since apparently you're not asking for dessert." "I want your leftovers," she said simply. "Not just food, time, space, money. You were going to spend to not feel helpless. I can spend it better." He did not bristle. People bristled when they didn't expect truth to arrive in a small package. He nodded once, as if a sharp corner had fit into a joint. "Tomorrow, then," he said. "Tomorrow," she echoed, and for a second it looked like she might salute, but she thought better of it and just grinned. The third night, a man with a camera showed up and said he was from the paper. He said he'd heard about a kid and a billionaire and miracles. He said the word poor, like a door he could enter any time he wanted. Nia told him, "The story is about the soup," and took his picture for her own archive. The headline, "The U." Next morning said, "Poor black girl asks paralyzed millionaire for miracle." The subhead was worse. Ms. Ruth turned the page with 2 fingers as if it were a piece of evidence she didn't want to smudge. "People see what they know how to name," Ms. Ruth said. "I'll teach them new words," Nia said. "You're 15, Ms. Ruth said. "So?" Nia said, and at Ms. Ruth's look, softened. "So yes, ma'am. I'll ask for help." She did, and it came, and some of it was the right kind. Part 3. The Pivot. The Harbor Line lobby smelled like new. Money pretending to smell like old books. Nia rode an elevator whose voice said the numbers in a soothing contralto and whose video screen showed the harbor's tides. She wore her jacket with the patches that didn't match and a shirt whose tag she had removed with nail scissors so it wouldn't scratch. In her backpack, a found VR headset, 2 lengths of braided cord, and a paper bag with lemon bars arranged so precisely you would think geometry had religion. She rehearsed this moment in her head again. How not to shrink. How not to make herself bigger than she was. Nobody taught her how. She taught herself and let Ms. Ruth and the aunties tell her what she couldn't see. Ezra's office had floor-to-ceiling windows, all right. You could see the water lanes, where boats moved like thoughts. A long glass table was littered with prototypes, small engines, soft robotics that looked like sea anemones, soundproof panels the color of rain. A framed photo on the shelf showed a man with a younger face halfway up a mountain, teeth bared in the kind of grin that crowned the world in triumph. Next to it, a newer photo of neighborhood drum in his lobby, Ty's red braces cutting through, sunlight like ribbon. "You made my building sound like a city," he said as she came in. "It is a city," she said. "Most buildings just pretend they're not in it." He laughed. He wore a shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. The tendons in his forearms spoke of gym hours and adaptive equipment. He was already who he was, injury and all. Nia had no interest in making him someone else. She wanted him to use what he had been hoarding, like a pantry after a blizzard. "This is my team," he said, and gestured. The people who had been pretending not to gawk at the 15-year-old with the backpack came forward with smiles. There was Dev, who ran Harbor Line's sustainability arm. May, who had built soft exoskeleton gloves and wanted to do more. Jacqueline from PR, whose smile was warm and whose eyes measured damage. Nia shook hands and said, "I'm not here for a story that calls me a miracle." And Jacqueline said, "Noted," in a voice that, to her credit, sounded like she meant it. "What do you want to build?" Ezra asked. "A pipeline," Nia said. "Leftovers to miracles." "How does it work?" "You sign with restaurants, bakeries, grocery stores. We pick up what's safe and legal. We don't make church ladies do the city's job. We get the city to certify kitchens, deliver permits overnight. We pay people who know how to feed a block to feed it. We learn which shelters aren't safe and fix the reason why. We don't call it charity. We call it infrastructure." Dev's eyebrows went somewhere near his hairline. "You thought about this?" "I live it," she said. "Funding?" Ezra asked. "Angel investment?" Nia said, chin up. "Terms. You don't own it. You help it survive long enough to not need you." May grinned. "You're a terror. I love it." "I'm also going to show you a miracle you can feel," Nia said to Ezra, turning to the window, the harbor blazing like a sheet of coins. He didn't flinch. He looked at the VR headset like a man who had both scorned and secretly longed for the comfort it promised. "All right." She pulled out the headset and cords, hands steady. "This is not cure talk," she said. "This is story work. Phantom. Limb pain is the brain arguing with the body. Memory can argue back. I want to see what happens if we add a third voice." She had mapped the office floor in the headset, taped markers to his chair's wheels, strung a mesh of braided cord under. The glass table that she could tug to create tiny safe resistance against his wheels at specific beats. May watched, eyes flicking with curiosity. "Where'd you learn to do this?" "Leftover YouTube," Nia said. Ezra let her adjust the headset. "If I cry, we don't call it a miracle," he said. "If you cry, we call it being a person." Nia said, "Deal," he said, and the word felt bigger than the room. She started the program. The office fell away. In the world Nia had built out of stitched code and borrowed views, the floor was a boardwalk, sun-grayed, with paint scuffs where a kid had once carved initials. The water reached to kiss the boards and pulled back, laughing. The headset captured the tilt of his head and fed him the movement of bodies alongside his. The drumline's spin, Ty's torque, the sway of people who had learned to translate gravity into art. The cords under the table tugged lightly at his wheels when the program told them to, asking him to push forward and then resisting like the give of a hill. His hands moved on instinct, old grooves turning on, muscle memory waking a little like a dog hearing its name. He moved. Not legs, not the fable of miracles that demanded a person return to a single story of themselves to be whole. He moved as he was, adding what he had. And in the headset, the boardwalk stretched in front of him like a promise with no end. He cried. No one said miracle. May put a hand on his shoulder blade, the one that always tightened first. Nia knelt, quiet, as if this were a place where reverence was not performative but obligate. It's like flying by remembering how to fall, Ezra said when he could. That's a terrible metaphor, Mr. Gaines, Jacqueline muttered, wiping her eyes. He laughed, and the kind of laughter that had echoes down the hallways felt like it came back to him with interest. He pulled the headset off and met Nia's gaze, not as a supplicant, not as a protagonist, but as an equal at a tipping point. How much? He asked. To launch your pipeline, to feed your block, to pay your people. She named a number that would have made her grandmother choke on her tea and then clear her throat and name a bigger one. Dev's eyebrows rose. Ezra didn't blink. Yes, he said. On my terms. On your terms. And with an advisory board from the block, she said, relentless. And a youth council with real teeth, he returned, surprising her. And union wages, she smiled. Now you're talking. They shook. May, vibing like a one-woman brass section, whooped. Nia pulled lemon bars out of the bag like offering, and Dev took one and said, infrastructure, around a mouthful, of sugar. That afternoon, a news alert hit Nia's cracked phone with a headline that dropped the word girl like a weapon and soldered the word poor to her name as if it were a last name. The leady spent more time on Ezra's chair than his choices. The comments were worse. Nia watched her name warped on hot glass. They're going to make this a fairy tale, Jacqueline said, weary and furious. Billionaire saves girl, girl saves billionaire. They'll forget 1,000 hands and mouths. It isn't a fairy tale, Nia said. It's a map. Then we'll draw it, Ezra said. And if they write it wrong, we'll print our own. On recycled paper, Dev added. Obviously, May said. Obviously, Nia echoed. And somewhere Ms. Ruth was making a face and saying, you can be right and polite at the same time, baby. It's a miracle. By the time the ink dried on the advisory board's bylaws, drafted on a folding table in the church basement, signed with pens borrowed from the pharmacy that still trusted people with pens, the pipeline already had a name. Tomorrow, Ms. Ruth said, pencil balanced under her bottom lip, eyes slanted up at the ceiling as if names lived in rafters. People been living day to day so long they forget tomorrow's a thing you can plan for. Tomorrow table, said a former line cook named Sloan, who had left 3 kitchens because her hands hurt and her boss called her slow when really he meant 45 and female. Because there's always room to add one. I like it, Nia said, and wrote tomorrow table in block letters on an index card that smelled like shoe polish and old apples. Under it, she wrote 3 rules. No one eats in a photo, no one works for free. No one calls it a miracle until we can teach somebody else to do it. That last one's a little long, Dev observed, a grin quirked. It's a reminder, Nia said. Miracles are a training manual. The advisory board had 7 people. Ms. Ruth, of course, Sloan, who would oversee kitchens, a janitor named Mr. Imani who knew which city officials had aging parents and which churches ran on gossip or grace, a kid from the youth center named Mal who could get permission slips signed faster than any adult, a home health aide named Carla who carried a day's worth of contingency plans in her purse, a small business owner named Leon who ran a laundromat, and a secondary economy of kindness. And Ty, who rolled in with a notebook and a pen that said, "No bad ideas," and meant it. At the first meeting, Nia put a crate of lemons on the table and a box of bakery rejects that should have been stale, but weren't. "Every time someone says the word charity," she said, "we squeeze a lemon and remember what we're not. Every time someone says infrastructure, we eat a cookie." "Child," Ms. Ruth said, eyes dancing, "we're going to get scurvy the other way round." They started anyway. Dev drafted a template for restaurant partners that did not make it sound like salvation, just a sound logistical choice. May designed a training module for food safety that involved bright printable icons and a thermometer that beeped in a voice that scolded like a favorite auntie. Jacqueline, to her credit, wrote a media policy that said, "No pity narratives, no poverty. Porn. Consent is holy, ask before you record. Ask again." On a fog-laced morning, Ezra convened a round table for chefs and owners in Harborline's glassy conference floor. The city lay below like a map ironed smooth. Elysium's owner came, guarded and curious. So did the guy who ran a busy faux place and a baker with tattoos of wheat stalks and a woman whose diner had a line out the door from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day for 30 years. Some of them had already been donating what they could without knowing if it mattered. Some were there to be seen. Some came wary because the last time a big man came with cameras and promises, the shadow he cast felt colder than the winter they spent under it. "We're not asking you to save anyone," Nia said, standing on a low platform because the fancy podium made her feel like she had borrowed someone else's mouth. "We're asking you to not throw away what could feed the block if we help you move it. We'll handle pickup. We'll handle cold chain. We'll pay folks to do it right. We'll give you a tax letter and a sticker that says you're part of Tomorrow Table, if that matters to your marketing. But this is how it works," she said, and tapped the 3 rules on a slide that May had made with colors bright enough to make the whole room blink. "No one eats in a photo. No one works for free. No one calls it a miracle until we can teach somebody else to do it." "What about liability?" asked the baker with wheat stalks. "State Good Samaritan law covers donation in good faith," Dev said. "We're adding a city ordinance to firm it up. We'll help you log temps, track lots, and keep records so if anyone asks questions, the answers are already written." "What about control?" asked Elysium's owner delicately. And Nia understood what sat under the word. Who owns the story? Who decides how much is enough? Who takes the blame when the world's hunger shows its teeth? "You control what you donate," Nia said. "We control where it goes, because we know where the need is and you don't get to pick the good. Poor." The words left her mouth with the steadiness of something she'd practiced in a mirror, and then in the litany of 100 small indignities. "There's enough dignity to go around." A chef in a crisp white jacket raised a hand. "I have staff who hide their hunger. They take home scraps and call it a perk. If I sign, can they line up with everyone else?" "They can be first. In line if they want," Nia said. "Or they can sign up to pick up on their way home and take extra for their building. We're not policing anyone's shame." He nodded, eyes wet. "Where do I sign?" Within a week, 15 restaurants and 4 groceries had inked with Tomorrow Table. On the whiteboard in the church basement, Mal drew lines between dots like a conspiracy theorist trying to solve a case that everyone already knew the answer. To hunger everywhere, food everywhere, a pipeline blocked by neglect. E-bikes with insulated boxes, Harborline logos on one side, Tomorrow Table on the other, began appearing at loading docks. The riders were paid and trained and wore gloves that May made in the lab upstairs. Soft exoskeletons that hugged hand, joints and let grip last longer without pain. "You're saving me from tendinitis," Sloane said the first day she tried them, flexing her fingers and grinning. "I'll settle for making your day a little kinder," May said. "Saving's a group project." Carla synchronized schedules like a maestro. Leon set up a wash station behind the laundromat so riders could sanitize gear without waiting for the church kitchen to open. Mr. Imani smoothed things at City Hall when a health department inspector blanched at the phrase warmers. "You'll get your temperatures," he said, not unkindly. "Let the child do her work." The first week, they fed 423 people. The second week, 709. The third week, 1,100 and change. Plus, a dog that everyone pretended not to see and definitely fed. Nia tracked it on a spreadsheet that scrolled like a quiet hymn. At the end of each day, when they could, she and Ezra met at the dock. She brought him another small miracle. Once, a choir of kids with kazoos humming Hallelujah so off-key it turned ecstatic. Once, a string of old keys she had polished and hung like chimes that sang when the wind threaded them. Once, a wrinkled woman who taught him to read palms and then refused payment and asked for a job picking up soups. "You know this isn't sustainable," Ezra said one night, not as a criticism, but as a man counting resources. "The miracles, I mean. The magic." "They're not magic," Nia said, stepping so that her boot heels lined with the seam between boards. "They're reminders. If we stop remembering, the pipeline gets dry." "Okay," he said, and because he was not a man who asked without giving, he brought something too. One night it was Ty's drumline in the lobby again, but this time with a string quartet and a beatboxer, and a woman reciting a poem about the physics of bread that made Ms. Ruth clap on the offbeat like she knew the secret beat behind it. Another night, it was a human resources policy that closed the building at 7 on Thursdays so janitorial staff could go to their kids' games, because Leon had said, "It's always the people who clean who miss the childhoods." On the first day, a grocery warehouse let Tomorrow Table into its back dock. Mal sketched a plan on the wall whiteboard that involved arrows, smiley faces, and tiny lightning bolts over anything that needed cold. It looked like a cartoonist had fallen in love with logistics. A man from a network news show filmed it without asking. Jacqueline placed a gentle hand over the lens and said, "Consent is holy." And for once the man backed off and whispered sorry, like it was new to his mouth. "People are going to come for you," Ms. Ruth told Nia, handing her a slice of pound cake wrapped in wax paper. "They love a girl until she asks for the right things." "I'm not a girl, I'm a person," Nia said with enough delightful disrespect to make Ms. Ruth wheeze laugh. "There she is," Ms. Ruth said. "Blessings on whomever put that spine in you. Now please, for the sake of all that is holy, get some sleep." The week they hit 2,000 meals, the city sent a letter that said, "Congratulations, you have been selected for expedited permitting." In the same envelope, there was another letter that said, "Notice of inspection, potential violations." "They just like to pretend we don't know how to read," Mr. Imani said dryly. "We'll be ready." They were. May tuned warmers to keep. Soup at a steady safe temperature and beep when lids stayed open. Dev negotiated a bulk purchase of reusable containers that popped like Tupperware when sealed right. Sloan reworked the church kitchen's workflow so nobody crossed raw and cooked and nobody argued with Ms. Ruth's knife policy. On inspection day, the health department official put on gloves as if wading into a swamp. She tested surfaces, thermometers, and patience. The riders held their positions like an orchestra waiting for the first downbeat. When she finished, she looked at her clipboard, then at Nia, and said nothing for a long time. "You're the kid from the paper," she said finally. "I am a person from the block," Nia said, "and I am 15. The inspector's mouth twitched. "My grandmother fed a block from her stoop on Sundays. Your containers are properly labeled. Your temperatures are steady. Your log is cleaner than most restaurants I see. Work on your glove change discipline." "Yes." "Ma'am," Sloan said, already snapping off a pair to prove she could. The inspector scribbled on her form. "Approve." A cheer went up that no one had planned, but everyone had been holding since their hands touched their first ladle. That night, when Ezra rolled onto the dock, Nia was there with a glass jar in which she had trapped 10 lightning bugs and then let them go. one by one, at the count of 3. "Why count?" he asked. "So they don't think it's random," she said, smiling. He looked at her, at the city, at the water. "It isn't." He said it like a promise and a warning at once. The spill the day the fridge died, it was 96 degrees and the air stuck to skin like sincerity. Dev's temperature alarm skittered to red in the space of a song. Carla three-way called Sloan and Nia so fast the ringtone tripped on itself. "The walk-in at the East Hub is out," she said. "I've got milk and meat climbing the charts. We've got 2 hours on cold packs, maybe." "I'm calling Leon," Nia said, already running. "We can reroute dry goods to the church, perishables to the North Hub if we can get moving now." "I'm calling the city," Ezra said from his office, already moving too, the wheels of his chair whispering like tide. "We'll need a permit. For a generator where a permit is not supposed to be. Jacqueline, call the outlet store with the portable jeans. May, you and Dev go patch." It spun like that all day, a dance of compression and release, worry and action. The riders moved like bees, e-bikes humming. The drumline showed up with ice chests. Someone joked that rhythm could keep things cold and everyone laughed and then didn't because sometimes it felt like it might. They saved most of it. They lost some. Sloan wept once in the walk-in from the grief of good food gone bad on her. Watch, and then came out and yelled about hand-washing like a drill sergeant in a cartoon. By nightfall, the generator chugged like a tired god, and the freezer hummed a note so sweet you could sing harmony with it. Nia sat on the church steps with a warm bottle of ginger ale that tasted like childhood and exhaustion. Her phone buzzed. A video. The man from the network at the round table had stitched clips of Nia from different angles, made her movements look hungry and small, paired them with shots of Ezra's chair and the mountain photo, like the story knew how to tell itself without people. The caption read, "The girl who saved a billionaire." When she finished watching, she put the phone face down, then face up again, because hiding it felt like surrender. The comments were a foam of love and bile and the kind of eager ownership that tastes like sugar and control. "Poor black girl," someone wrote, and attached a cartoon heart. "You shouldn't let your kid around that man," someone wrote, like every girl near a man with money was a cautionary tale. "God is good," someone wrote. "God didn't run those e-bikes," someone replied. "Sanctimonious and cruel." "Hey," Ezra's voice said, soft, and she looked up. He had come quietly. He was getting good at arriving without being huge. "Jacqueline's on it." "I don't need her to be on it," Nia said. "I need them to tell our story right." "They won't," he said, not unkindly. "We will. But we might not be the first people they hear." She nodded, not because she liked it, but because the truth sometimes fit like a dress you didn't ask to wear and had to learn to move in anyway. The next morning's email from the health department was not a surprise if you had been alive in this city for longer than an hour. "Temporary suspension pending review," it said. The inspector from the week before had not signed it. "What was the violation?" Mr. Imani asked, flipping the letter, like maybe different words would fall out. "Generator without permit," Nia said, voice level. "Temporary measures not in code. It was either that or toss 3,000 meals worth of supplies." "So we made a choice," Sloan said. "And we tell that story. People will understand." "They will," Ms. Ruth said. "But the ones who don't will make very long noises when they disapprove. So be prepared." A council member used the suspension to grandstand about safety and process. A pundit with a radio show whose audience was large enough to be a problem called Tomorrow Table a political play. A coalition of service providers, some threatened by the newcomer, sent a letter that said turf in the politest possible way. And a blogger with a sharp pen and a long memory wrote a piece that asked the right questions and made it hurt. The drumline wanted to march on City Hall. Mal wanted to make a TikTok that used the letter like confetti. Ezra wanted to call a couple of donors and whisper into the right ears. Naya wanted to fix the fridge and the narratives and also sleep. "What do you want?" he asked her, in the quiet of an office where the VR rig sat like a promise he had. Honored. "A hearing," she said. "Not just for us. For the ordinance. Good Samaritan plus enforcement, that means something. Permits you can get in a day if you know what you're doing. Money for cold storage in every neighborhood. An omnibus," Dev said, impressed and wary, like watching someone juggle knives for the first time and be good at it. "A map," Nia said. "A thing they can't just pull from under us by calling it a pilot." "You'll get pushback," Jacqueline said. "They'll say you're 15. "I'll bring my advisory board," Nia said, "and my youth council, and a stack of data, and a choir if they let me." "You're all right," Ms. Ruth said, hand warm on the back of Nia's head like a blessing. The day of the hearing, the line to get inside stretched so long it looked like a parade forgot why it gathered and decided joy might be reason enough. Ty's drum line tapped soft rhythms in the rear, not a protest so much as a heartbeat to gather around. Inside the bench was a row of skeptical faces under fluorescent lights that made everyone honest to the point of unflattering. The council member who loved cameras leaned forward like someone about to bite. The health department inspector who had passed them the first time sat in the back row, hands folded tight in her lap. Jacqueline delivered context. Dev delivered facts. Sloan told a story about the way a neighborhood behaves when the pot on the back burner is always on. Leon talked about the science of water temperature like it was a prayer. Mr. Imani said what the city already knew but needed to hear from a good mouth. "If you get out of the way, we'll do your job for you and not charge you. But we will remember the days you made it harder." Then Nia spoke. She wore her corduroy jacket with the patches and a shirt with no scratchy tag and a pair of shoes that squeaked a little because they were still new enough to squeak. "You called me a girl," she said, and the council member blinked as if the line were a flirt and not an accusation, which told Nia exactly how much damage a man could do with a smile. "Paper did, radio did, strangers on the internet did. It makes it easier to pat me on the head and tell me to learn the rules. I'm learning. I read your rules. I counted the steps in your permitting process. I timed how long it takes to get a callback when you're a non-profit with a famous man's name attached and when you're a church lady who has only God and a roll of stamps. Guess which one moves faster?" A murmur. She waited for it to die. "We did break a rule," she continued. "We used a generator we weren't permitted for. I will take the fine. I will add it to our training. No more improvising on electrical. But look at me." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a photo printed on cheap paper. On it, Mal's whiteboard, arrows and lightning bolts connected to dots that were labeled not with numbers, but with names: Mr. Lee on Pratt Street, shelter on Eager, waiting at the rec center. Every dot is a person. Every arrow is time. My grandmother used to call what we do root work. We don't call it a miracle. We call it getting to tomorrow. You can choose to make it easier, or you can choose to make it harder. Either way, we're going to do it. She did not say sir. She did not soften words that had done push-ups all their life to earn the right to stand on their own. It was not a movie. There was no slow clap. The council member asked about cost. Another asked about oversight. One asked how they would prevent people from taking more than their share, and Ms. Ruth said, "By minding our business while they mind theirs." And the room laughed, because sometimes you get a line that breaks a spell. When it was over, the motion to suspend the suspension passed 5-4. Temporary reinstatement pending ordinance, with a working group to draft policy, chaired by the inspector who had passed them the first time. "Her name's Aaliyah," Mr. Imani said, watching. Her shake hands like a woman who didn't love cameras but loved a job done right. "I went to high school with her cousin." "You go to high school with everybody's cousin," Leon said. "City's small when you know where to stand," Mr. Imani replied. On the courthouse steps, a man in a polo shouted that Ezra was using a child to launder a conscience. Another shouted that Nia was using a rich man to angle for money. The world always had a bucket of easy words to throw at complicated work. Nia let them splash. Ezra took one step toward the first man and stopped when Nia put a finger on his sleeve. "Don't spend your shoulders on hecklers," she murmured. He breathed in, breathed out. "What do we spend them on?" "Deliveries," she said. "Cold chain. Tomorrow." He smiled. It was small. It counted. Part 6. The Ledger. The Week. The working group began its meetings. Harborline's board called an emergency session behind glass that muffled voices and magnified glares. "Ezra," said a man with a tie that could have paid for a month of rent in a part of the city he was actively buying. "We love your passion." The word shone like a warning flare. "But the company cannot become a political football." "It won't," Ezra said. He wore the look of a man whose days on mountains had taught him that the muscles you needed most were the small ones in your hands. "We're making a logistical improvement in the city. We're funding it appropriately. We're not diverting research dollars." "It's still risk," said a woman whose portfolio arms returns had funded 2 of the company's last expansion rumors. "The headlines are good and bad," Jacqueline said, "and we're managing them, including the one with the hashtag Tupperware Jesus," the tie asked, and someone snorted, and Jacob from legal squeezed his nose like a man fighting a headache and a laugh at once. "It's not funny," Ezra said. He did not raise his voice. It carried anyway. "People are hungry. We have an efficient way to get food to them. We're building a model the city can adopt. If you want to discuss risk, let's discuss the risk of living in a city where people see our building from their shelter cots and think we don't care." "That's sentiment. That's logistics," Dev said, uninvited, appearing at Ezra's shoulder with a spreadsheet that looked like it could beat someone up in an alley. "Productivity goes up when employees live in a stable city with lower crime and stress. Bad PR from doing nothing costs us more than doing the right thing. Also, and I am being sincere here," he added, "because sometimes stating you were being sincere was funny and true enough to be disarming. We sleep better." "What if it fails?" asked the woman, Nia in the corner of the room because Ezra had asked her to be, and she had said yes on the condition she could bring Ms. Ruth and Mal if she wanted. Stood up. "Then we fix it." The tie looked at her like he had stepped in something he couldn't identify and didn't like. "This is a board meeting, and I am a person," she said politely enough that Ms. Ruth nodded in the back like, "See, she can be right and polite simultaneously when the occasion demands. You're not asking what if it fails. You're asking what if it fails and you have to admit a girl helped build it." He opened his mouth. He shut it. "We're not voting on a halt," the chair said finally, perhaps because he had a conscience, perhaps because he had a daughter, perhaps because he had a sense of which way the wind was blowing, or a third thing that had to do with dinner plans. "We're voting on oversight, quarterly audits, a cap on spend, which Mr. Gaines has already proposed. And Ezra, I want to see a succession plan." "I'm not dying," Ezra said, whose days had taught him that death rarely asked permission to enter a sentence. "No," said the chair. "But you might decide to spend more time at City Hall than I'd like, and I prefer contingencies." "Fine," Ezra said. He could be pragmatic. He could be many things. He could be a man who said yes to oversight in public and made sure it did not suffocate in private. "You can have your audits. The cap stands. The work goes on." After, in the hallway, he leaned his head back against the cool glass and watched a cloud move across the slice of sky like a teacher crossing a classroom, correcting posture with its presence. "My mother wanted me to be a teacher," he said, to no one in particular. "You are," May said, handing him a granola bar that tasted like oats and coping. "You just have a different classroom. And you have a girl on your class roster who does not do extra credit," Ms. Ruth added amiably, sweeping past on her way to the elevator, Mal in tow, both carrying binders thick with notes for the working group. Go on now. Don't be late to your own trouble. The working group met in a room with mismatched chairs and a whiteboard that had hosted 20 years of good intentions. Aliyah from Health sat at one end, Nia at the other. In between, representatives from shelter networks, labor, small business, and the city's legal department, which had sent a man who looked like he had never thrown a party but could tell you instantly which outlet might blow a fuse. They drafted. They argued. They added lines like seams, stitching language to hold under strain. Good Samaritan law extended to prepared foods, with clear standards for handling. Liability limited for donors and volunteers operating under certified programs like Tomorrow Table. An expedited permit process for emergency measures, including generators that met a spec that Dev insisted on writing himself because if you leave it to whoever wrote the boilerplate on the city's website, you would end up with 3 people in a room deciding what safe enough means. What about wages? Ty asked. We say union wages. We make it real. We say prevailing wage with a floor, said the labor rep, pragmatic. Or it'll get killed. Then we say prevailing wage with a floor, Nia said. And we explain the floor like they were 5. What about oversight? Asked the legal guy who had never thrown a party. We sit right here, Ms. Ruth said. Once a quarter. Food safety reports, labor reports, a human report. We ask people if it's working. We listen. You can't codify listening, the man said. Watch me, Ms. Ruth said, and they wrote it down. The night before the vote, there was a knock at Ms. Ruth's door. It was late enough that the heir had learned how to be gentle. Nia opened it because she had been sent to fetch a recipe card that lived under Ms. Ruth's china and refused to live anywhere else. On the stoop stood Ezra, a takeout bag hanging. From one handle of his chair, the way flowers hang from a shepherd's crook. His shoulders looked tired. His eyes did not, which was a particular miracle that Nia filed in the correct folder. I brought leftovers, he said, holding up the bag with a flourish that made Ms. Ruth chuckle behind Nia's shoulder. Trade? Nia asked, soft because the day had been loud. For what? 5 minutes with no agenda, she said, patting the step next to his wheel. And then I'll let you tell me how a large city gets a small ordinance through without setting something important on fire. They sat. They did not talk for 4 of the 5 minutes. The 5th minute, Ezra told her about a time on a mountain when he had to decide which gear to leave behind to make the summit before weather came down and made the air mean. He chose wrong and paid in cold. He chose right the next time. He learned. Very little in his life had been one time only, as long as you lived through the first time and were honest about it. Okay, Nia said when the minute was up. You're the last person allowed to make a mountain metaphor this week. Deal, he said, and when he laughed, it had a tired edge that felt right. It was a laugh that didn't claim victory, just breath. The ordinance passed 8-1. If you closed your eyes, you could hear the cheer like when a train comes exactly on time and the platform applauds because it's allowed to still delight you when the world works. After, reporters shoved microphones. Aliyah fielded legal questions with a cool forehead. The council member who liked cameras took his photo with a ladle he had never used and looked like he had won a prize for good posture. Nia stepped to a mic only when Ms. Ruth nudged her. She said, "We begin again tomorrow," and the words landed like a bell. Part 7. The unfurl summer turned to the sharp grace of September. The pipeline moved quiet and sure, like skill. Tomorrow, table stickers gleamed in windows across neighborhoods, a constellation no telescope had predicted, but that made new maps out of familiar streets. The e-bike's whir became another city sound like church bells and sirens, and the lilt of somebody laughing on a stoop. The advisory board argued about potato salad etiquette and policy language and which hub should get the next fridge and kept showing up because the secret to most of what works is simply showing up again. Ezra's board did not oust him. They did put him on 3 panels he hated and could not skip, where he said complicated things in short sentences and watched the moderators blink like too much light had come through a window too fast. He renegotiated a lease for a warehouse and wrote a transition plan that named Dev and May in large letters, because you don't build if you don't plan for your own absence. "You're not going anywhere," May said, but she smiled because she knew. Planning for absences is a way of declaring presence. On the first crisp evening, Nia's grandmother would have declared a soup night even if no one was hungry. Ms. Ruth put on a sweater that had been mended so many times it had a new geography. The kitchen hummed like a beehive. Sloane rolled dough like a woman rolling out the memory of something that had been tight and was now relaxed. Leon tinkered with a new wash rack. Mal and the Youth Council ran a pop-up program where people could sign up to pick up extra for their buildings and get a magnet with the emergency hotline for when a fridge dies on a 96-degree day and the generator isn't permitted yet. At the dock, where the first boats had blinked Ezra's name into water, the boardwalk now had small embedded lights the city had allowed because Aaliyah had whispered in the right ear and because a public artist had fallen in love with the idea. Of tides that spell names of people no one puts in headlines, the woman on Lexington with the 4 kids, and the smile that forgave your lateness. The man who always swept the corner because he liked seeing a line against the mess, even if no one else cared. The lights came up like stars when the water lapped a certain way. It wasn't a miracle. It was programming and a city contract and a teenage girl asking and a civil servant saying yes. One night Ezra arrived with no bag and a look like he had been told a thing about himself he had not wanted to hear and had decided to hear it anyway. "I have leftovers," he said, and opened. His palm, in it, a folded paper with his resignation from a board that had tied its philanthropy to a politician who had once said people should pick themselves up by their bootstraps when the city had stolen their boots. He had argued, lost, left. "What's the trade?" Nia asked. "You show me how to unfurl without collapsing," he said. "I was good at pushing. I need to learn how to hold." She thought for a minute, because some trades you don't do on instinct. "Come to the church," she said. "Don't talk, just pour." He did. He wore a shirt he could afford to stain and a pair of gloves May had modified for grip and a face that looked like a man doing something well and not needing anyone to know. He ladled soup into bowls. When a kid in a bright yellow jacket said, "You look like the man on the billboard," he said, "I am a man with a ladle. Would you like bread?" And the kid said yes, and if you listened hard, you could hear a small gear in the city shift. A month passed, like 5 minutes and a year. The ordinance turned into signage in kitchens, where timers beeped in goofy auntie voices and posters about glove changing hung next to posters about where to get free asthma meds and a flyer for the choir. The drum line played in the lobby every other Friday. The string quartet joined them once, and everybody's face looked like a surprise party had been thrown for their ears. There were still people who made noise. Headlines that called Nia poor like it was her first name and called Ezra paralyzed like it was his only story. People who sent emails to Jacqueline asking when the miracle who got fed could be made available for a photo. Jacqueline wrote back, "No, one eats in a photo." So often she turned it into a t-shirt she wore to bed. One late fall day, a new problem arrived with a flyer that had been printed in rage and fear. It said, "Do not feed." Some businesses, tired of people leaning on their stoops, had posted signs. Someone thought putting the signs up near the church would be prudent. It was not. "We're feeding indoors," Leon said, calm, and his calm had the weight of bleach and buckets. "We're delivering to buildings," Carla added. "They can stick their signs on the shelves where their hearts would be if somebody ever stocked them." "That's not helpful," Mr. Imani chided. but his smile said he would enjoy the image of a heart aisle in a store. Nia took the sign off the church fence with 2 fingers and put it in the trash. "We're not having a sign fight," she said. "We're having a conversation, me and whoever put this up, with cookies." "You are dangerous," Ms. Ruth said, not naming the softness in her eyes. They had the conversation, with cookies and data and not a lot of patience for lies. The sign came down from the business windows. The business owners came by a week later with donations. One stayed to eat soup and cried into his bowl because his mother had once lined up for food in a different city, a different century, and he had promised himself he would never be the man who forgot. Life is unkind to promises you make without planning for them. December came. The harbor iced in thin sheets the color of pewter, and a wind cut so sharp it could have shaped wood. Tomorrow Table had its first winter to survive. The cold chain was easier, the morale chain was not. People were tired, people were sad, people were alive and thus complicated, cranky, and full of light at odd angles. On the shortest day, Nia wheeled a cart into Harborline's lobby while Ezra finished a meeting that had clearly been a meeting in which someone had tried to make something complicated simple enough to sell. She waited for him without pacing. The cart was draped with a cloth that had belonged to her grandmother and held something that smelled like citrus and heat. "What did you bring me?" Ezra asked, rolling over with a face that had seen 3 offers turned down that afternoon and chosen to live in his body anyway. "A miracle you can taste," she said, and whisked off the cloth. Under it, oranges studded with clove, a pot of mulled cider, and a small cake that looked humble and rich at once. On top of the cake, written in icing so careful it broke your heart a little, was the word tomorrow. "It's your birthday?" he guessed. "No," she said, laughing. "It's our ordinance's birthday. It's 1 month old. No frosting for 6 months. We're realistic. But a little cake to mark the work? That we can do." He cut a slice with a knife May had to fetch, because the lobby's knives were better suited for ribbon cuttings than crumb. He took a bite. He closed his eyes like people do when sugar speaks the truth. When he opened them, they were bright in a way that had not belonged to him 6 months. "Ego, and now did. Trade," he said, mouth thick with cake. "Leftovers for miracle." She lifted a shoulder. "What you got?" He nodded toward the window, and for a second she thought he was joking, and then she looked. Across the water, on the far side of the inner harbor, the old cannery that had been converted to an AI lab and rumor now lit from the inside like a lantern. In the windows, lights flickered on and off in patterns that were not random. It started messy, like someone trying to remember a tune under pressure. Then the beats aligned. The windows flashed a word she had told him not to put on a sign, and he had listened. Instead, he put it on a building that already belonged to the city. Not a plea, not a brand, a simple fact. TOMORRO. The lights lingered bright, then dimmed. Then a new pattern. She didn't know what it meant until May put a hand on her wrist and said, "Look." The windows drew a figure, like the thing children draw without thinking about proportion or perfection. 4 lines and a circle for a head, 2 lines for legs, 2 for arms. The figure rolled forward on wheels. Next to it, a figure on 2 legs. The lights blinked in sequence like a heartbeat. The 2 figures moved in tandem and then, in a small luminous flourish, lifted. Their arms, not a miracle, a reminder. A map. Nia sucked a breath in like she'd been running. "You absolute show-off," she said, and punched Ezra's armrest lightly. "I had help," he said. Dev and May did math. Jacqueline said no words in the press release. Aaliyah said be done by 10. We have a noise ordinance. She laughed and then put her finger under her eye because tears were silly about timing. "They will say it's a publicity stunt," she said. "They will say you did it to make people like you. They will write headlines that make this a fairy tale." "They will," he said, And then we will feed them soup. He lifted his cup. She lifted hers. In the lobby, someone who'd been standing at the elevator smiled for no reason anyone could pinpoint. On the street, the drumline's leader posted video that captured the lights and then turned back to the block because the block always needed a little more light. They brought the cake downstairs. Ms. Ruth took a piece and said, "It's a little dry," exactly like women say to ensure excellence. Sloane promised to adjust the recipe. Mal ate 2 slices and still asked for a third for a neighbor who wasn't hungry and would deflect and then eat half and say that was enough. Leon wore a paper party hat like a crown. Mr. Imani read out the ordinance language, herding applause with each clause like a conductor. Aliyah showed up in her city badge and a sweater with a hole in the sleeve and cried in the corner where no one could see and then moved to the center where people could and didn't care. At the end of the night, after dishes and laughter and the kind of tired that pleases bones, Nia walked to the dock. The water lapped. Somewhere a gull complained about the weather. The embedded lights were dark, waiting for the tide to speak their names again. Ezra rolled up next to her and did not say anything for a minute, then said, "I keep thinking of the first night." "You laughed," she said. "I did," he said. "And then this." "This," she repeated, and the word felt like something you could put on a shelf and know where to find when you needed it. "Not a miracle." "Never just a miracle," he agreed. "Math and mercy," she said. "Root work," he said. She bumped his wheel with her boot. He tapped her boot with his wheel. The city breathed. Tomorrow Table's riders rolled home on quiet streets. The Yassi. Cool air making their breath visible in small clouds that looked like proof the body knows how to say, "I am here." The harbor held the moon in a loose, forgiving hand. In the morning, there would be breakfast to distribute, and a phone call from a school principal who wanted a hub in the gym after hours, and a complaint about container lids that stuck, and a meeting with a funder who would need to be told no 3 times before he could hear yes with the right conditions, and an inspection and a new volunteer, and a fridge to defrost, and a choir rehearsal, and a life, and a life, and a life. "Tomorrow," Nia said. "Tomorrow," Ezra echoed.